Randy, you there?
I am.
Okay, good.
And I'm now the co-host, just in case.
Excellent. We are ready, right? All right. Good afternoon, everyone. I am Stu Simon, one of many enthusiastic OLLI volunteers. Welcome to today's event that's titled Learning to Talk to Each Other, the Braver Angels Story. Thank you all for attending. I expect you're all going to be glad that you did. I'll shortly be introducing our Braver Angels guest for today, Randy Liaz. Our format today will be an interview using questions prepared in advance, and it'll run about 1 hour-ish. I will stop my questions and invite you to submit yours at that time. To do that, you'll use the Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen, and you can submit your questions at any time. Also at the bottom of your screen is a closed caption option labeled CC if you want to see a live transcript. As always, if you have trouble with your webinar connection, the best thing to do is close your screen and re-enter with the link that you received. So let's get to it. I first learned about Braver Angels when I read a book titled The Power of Strangers. That book was about the many benefits of connecting with people who are different from you. One entire chapter in that book was titled How to Talk to Enemy Strangers. It told of the author's experience attending a Braver Angels event designed to break down barriers and build understanding. That was the beginning of my fascination with this unique organization. So our guest today is Randy Liaz. Randy, hello. There he is. Hi, Randy. Randy Liaz is the Senior Director of Events and Partner Engagement. Braver Angels is a national organization intent upon reducing the amount of polarization. Randy has been working with that organization in various capacities since 2017. From 2018 through 2021, Randy served as the California State Coordinator of Braver Angels. He is an experienced moderator, regularly leading workshops and moderating debates, in addition to writing periodic columns for Braver Angels Media. And Randy occasionally appears on the Braver Angels podcast. Randy also does consulting for automotive clients, having worked for nearly 20 years in the automotive industry. He spent his career doing forecasting and analytics, working for brands like Kelley Blue Book and Auto Trader, and in advertising for Ford vehicles. Randy is also as an experienced professional wedding officiant, a soccer goalie, and a frequent amateur chef. He is truly a Renaissance man. That's my observation. Randy did not write that. Randy grew up in Long Island, New York. After getting his undergraduate degree in economics from Duke University, Randy made his way across the country, living in Michigan, where he got his MBA from the University of Michigan. He will soon be moving from California back to the East Coast, setting up shop near family in Washington. So Randy, welcome, and thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you, Stu. It's great to see you. Great to be here.
Okay. Why don't we start, Randy, by having you tell us about yourself, your own history that led you to your initial involvement with Braver Angels, and how you progressed toward leadership in the organization.
Absolutely, yeah. So as you mentioned, I started out in the auto industry, and it was around the election of 2016 when I really started to be curious about how folks on the other side of the divide really thought. And I was trying to engage in those conversations. And I said, hey, this is really possible if we have the tools, the motivation to do this. And I even wanted to try to start my own nonprofit called the Empathy Project. So I did some writing about that, and I gave that to my friends and family to get some feedback. And one of my friends wound up sending me a podcast on which an organization then called Better Angels was featured. And I said, wow, this is exactly what I was thinking about. And so why don't I, since I don't have any organizing experience or connections in the nonprofit world, why don't I join this organization and see what they're all about? So in 2017, I got trained as a moderator in our first cohort of moderators to be trained. And I started moderating workshops, and it was life-changing. It really indicated to me that this was where I was meant to put my efforts. And so I started off as a volunteer with the organization. And then, my career in the auto industry wasn't going exactly how I'd hoped. There was a string of layoffs that I got caught up in, and I realized that the work that I was doing with this organization was more fulfilling than that I was doing in the auto industry. And so I decided to make depolarization my career, and decided to make sure that I could get on staff at then Better Angels. And then, we'll talk a little bit, I think later about my path during the pandemic, but I actually stepped up to lead our pivot from in-person workshops to online. And that was how I kind of made my migration to staff. And from there, I started working with our partners, and now I really focus on our strategic partners and building a partnership network. So it's been just utterly fascinating and really inspiring work, and really changed my life.
Wonderful. Having a job that aligns with your passion, we should all be so lucky. Why don't you tell us a little bit about how Braver Angels was formed, what the history was, what the early initiatives looked like?
Yeah, absolutely. So in the wake of the 2016 election, when it was very clear that this country was on a very negative path, some folks who had been interested in the idea of depolarization brought together a group of roughly equal numbers of Trump and Clinton supporters after the election. It happened in a barn in rural Ohio, and they had a whole weekend to talk about what they believed and to try to understand one another a little bit better. That was designed by Dr. Bill Doherty, a pretty prominent psychotherapist and professor at the University of Minnesota. And he really put a lot of thought into that design. And since then, that weekend-long session has been distilled into our Red-Blue workshop, which is really either a day-long, or we actually have a half-day version of that. But from there, the organization really took off. We did a bus tour through the Rust Belt and had several of these workshops. And the organization started to build from there. We started to gain members, and we started to branch out our initiatives. So we realized that not only do people want to talk to other folks who believe differently from them in these formal kind of settings, but they also wanted to be able to talk to the people in their lives already. So we started doing training workshops. We also expanded to debates and several other programs. And the organization really took off from there. Our membership started to really rise, and people really started to understand the important role that we could play in our nation's discourse, to really understand, the idea that free exchange of ideas is so important for democracy.
So, Randy, you mentioned the organization has been growing. Roughly how many members have you got right now, or chapters in various states?
Yeah, so we have over 11,000 members and over 60,000 subscribers to our newsletters. And we've got 93 alliances around the country. Those are local groups that work together to put on events, and even when they come to a consensus, they like to talk about that with influencers like the media and public officials. And actually, we just hit over 100,000 event registrations, and that's actually just since the pandemic, since we've only been really tracking things in this certain way since the pandemic started, and we migrated to online workshops. So in just the past 3 years, we've had 100,000 interactions with our workshops, and we also have 1,200 trained event volunteers, which is it's really important for the character of our organization, because we are really volunteer driven. So to have that number of people who are really doing the work is really important, and a special thing for our organization, I think.
Oh, wonderful. You've had explosive growth, which is great to hear. All these things take money. How is Braver Angels funded?
Yeah, we have a mix of foundation grants, major and small donor contributions, and we also have member dues. Our membership costs $12 a year, so it's a pretty low lift. But some people choose to give more. But one of the really important principles in terms of our funding is that, as with everything that we do, we really put a lot of effort into ensuring that funding comes from a set of sources that are balanced between red and blue. We definitely want there to be a sense of real power sharing within our organization, that the voices from each side and from all along the spectrum are going to be well represented, and that includes our funding. So we have funding from several conservative organizations and several liberal organizations, and all in between. So we take that very seriously.
So you mentioned in your historical overview that the Red Blue workshops were kind of your foundational activity. I'd like to hear more about that. I know they've drawn national attention. What are the objectives of the Red Blue workshops, Randy?
Yeah, so the stated objectives for those workshops is, well, first of all, to learn about the experiences, feelings, and beliefs of those on the other side. That's really central. It's the learning, right? We also want to discover areas of commonality in addition to those differences, and then gain insights that could be helpful to others in helping to polarize the community and the nation. But aside from those stated objectives, I think another thing that's really important for the Red Blue workshop is the ground rules that we lay out. And so the ground rules are, first, we are here to understand and explain our own views, not to change anybody else's mind. And that ground rule is so central to the way that this stuff functions. It really changes the tone of a workshop. We also tell people speak for themselves rather than trying to represent any group that they might feel they're affiliated with, right? We want them to present their authentic beliefs and really speak from their own perspective. And then we emphasize also to stick to the activity that we're in, right? So we don't want stray comments that people are just itching to get out and take swipes at the other side, because that can really derail the workshop. So we really conscientiously enforce these ground rules to create a structure that makes for real learning and fosters genuine curiosity between the two sides. And so it's about more than what we want to do. It's also how we do it that's just as important, I think.
Let's stay with that, how you do it. Tell us about the process in the Red Blue workshop. What might one of our members experience if they attended one, Randy?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is really a carefully designed sequence of events that builds the trust and goodwill as we go. So, we start off with an exploration of stereotypes. These are the stories that we tell each other about one another. And I want to emphasize that storytelling is so central to what we do. It's really how humans communicate. And how we are able to relate to one another. So we want to let people tell their own stories, right? So we have each side list out a list of how they think that the other side sees them. Okay, and then we give them a chance to correct those stereotypes. Why is it false? Why is it unfair? But we also ask them, is there a kernel of truth? A kernel of truth that you can identify within that stereotype that has led the other side to believe that about you. So we really want each participant in the workshop to be very self-reflective, to dig deep and understand, what are they projecting to the other side that they may not realize. And so that stereotypes exercise really helps to foster trust and goodwill between the two sides. And the next exercise, the fishbowl, builds on that trust, and it really lets people explore their own beliefs more freely. We ask them two questions. We say, why are your side's policies and beliefs good for the country? And we then give equal time for them to talk about what reservations they may have about their own side. And so when we give them just as much time to kind of do that internal work and dig deep, it really further builds that good faith between the two sides. And that's the only reason why the third exercise, our questions and answers exercise, is set up to succeed, because it can be really the most intense. We as moderators, we help the groups craft questions of curiosity, and that's not always easy, right? Because people they have burning questions in their head, but they're usually set up as a rhetorical question, like, how could you believe this? Or how could you support this person, right? And so we nudge them away from those questions, of those kind of attack questions, right? And we develop those questions of curiosity together. And then we allow them to ask them back and forth, and really have a bit of a conversation based on those questions, so they can really satisfy that burning curiosity that they have about how the other side thinks. And another important factor in this workshop is that after each activity that we do, we check in about what we've learned about one another. And that's really, really important. We also give them a chance to talk to one another one-on-one between reds and blues, to talk about the insights that they're gaining from one another. And that really strengthens those relationships. So at the end of a red-blue workshop, I've moderated dozens and dozens of these. And after each one, there's always a conclusion from someone when we're checking out, that we are so much closer in beliefs and understanding than they thought. And they also, someone usually says, well, my side is also more varied than I realized. There's more heterodoxy to those on my side.
Sounds like a very well thought out, well designed experience. I want to stay with the psychology of what's happening over there. Monica Guzman, one of your colleagues in Braver Angels Leadership, mentions in her book, I think it was called I Never Thought of It That Way, that people are usually nervous about crossing the political divide because they fear what they're going to find there, and they don't want to be hurt or have their intelligence challenged. Can you tell us a little more about how in these workshops that those fears are overcome? How are people made to feel comfortable?
Right. Yeah. And that's such an important part of this, right? Because, and it's the reason that first ground rule about, we're here to understand one another, not to change one another's minds, is so important, because that ground rule really does a lot of work. And so when people hear that and they recognize that the workshop is going to be populated with people who are there to learn from them and about them, rather than to challenge them and tell them that their beliefs are misguided or stupid, that is a big relief to a lot of folks, and especially if they've been belittled by the other side before, which is quite common, right? I live in a blue state, California, where many of my red colleagues and friends have said that they have stopped talking about what they believe because it is treated as unacceptable, and so they just put their heads down and they vote. Right. And I'm sure that it happens the same way in red states for liberals. Right. So, if we can show someone that they're going to be treated with honest curiosity and goodwill, they're all in.
So these, I think, ideally, optimistically, these can really be personal, transformative experiences, these workshops, Randy. Do you have any evidence or data of personal transformation occurring, or have you got any personal highs from your own experience?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so we have a lot of data on our website, and I'm happy to share the link for where people can look at studies that have been done. Over 80% of people who go through our red blue workshops feel more connected with the other side. For example, the score is even better for understanding the other side. And there was actually an academic study by folks from 7 different schools that said that our workshops significantly reduce polarization, and that people who attend them are more likely to internalize new information about out-group members, right? So the other side. But for me, I mean, what is most impactful has been those personal experiences, and also the stories that I hear from other people about their transformations. So here in Irvine, I have a good friend who came to a Red Blue workshop in 2019 for the first time, and she was skeptical and figured actually she might leave at lunchtime. But once the workshop started, she just dove in and she was so enthusiastic, and she actually became my most effective organizer. I was a state coordinator for California at the time, and she helped to build an alliance here in Orange County, and she's now one of our most frequent moderators. She works in moderator training, and she has this story about her relationship with her dad, which was really challenging. You know, that it was a bit of a pugilistic relationship when they would talk about politics, because they never saw eye to eye, and they were always just challenging one another, and it was a sport. But it really had a negative effect on the relationship. And after that workshop, she very much changed her approach to talking to her dad. And she tells this story about, you know, they were driving through a parking lot one day, and she was bringing him to an appointment, and he says, you know, I've been looking at this issue a little bit differently now. And she was so floored by this statement, she slammed on the brakes and dropped her jaw. She was like, what's going on here? And her relationship with her dad has actually become a lot stronger since then. And I've heard stories like that from other people of reconciled relationships. You know, obviously there's so many people in this country whose relationships have been really affected by polarization. And so if ever I have doubt about the effectiveness, the appropriateness of the work, right? People on either side are you know, will challenge you when you're when you focus on depolarization and say, well, you know, the other side is irredeemable. So, you know, why are we wasting time? Why don't we just rally our base? And, you know, and my mind always just goes back to those relationships that are at the heart of what we do. And, you know, the repair to those relationships is so important. And when I see it, it's inspiring.
What a great testimony to the effectiveness of your work and the organization's work, Randy. So we've talked about the Red Blue workshops, but I know Braver Angels also has quite a few other program offerings. What are those, and what are the objectives of those additional offerings?
Right. Yeah. So the Red Blue workshop is what we call an experiential workshop. So it's one of those where people can exchange their ideas freely and really learn about each other. We have another category, another workshop in there called the Common Ground Single Issue Workshop that really focuses on an issue in depth and allows people to develop points of agreement between the two sides. And then share those points of agreement with political leaders, with media, anyone who really is in position to influence things. But as I mentioned, people also want to be able to talk to those in their own lives. So we have our Skills for Bridging the Divide workshop, which is the first skills training workshop that we developed. And it's pretty straightforward. It's really, you know, how to talk to people who very much disagree with you. On the other hand, we also have Depolarizing Within, which focuses on our internal attitudes about folks on the other side, how we talk about them, and especially in groups of like-minded people, right? So I think we've all had the experience of kind of spiraling up in terms of demonization of the other side when we're just talking to folks who we agree with. And those conversations themselves are quite polarizing. So we give people the tools to intervene a bit and say, you know, these beliefs and these issues that we're talking about are a lot more complex, and the folks on the other side have complexity to their beliefs, and I've seen it. And so, you know, those kinds of conversations I think are just as important as the ones between the two sides. We also have Families in Politics, which, you know, every November we would hear from people who were just dreading going home for Thanksgiving because they were going to see their relatives they hadn't seen in a while. They often remembered the dynamics that spiraled out of control when they would, talk to their crazy relatives, right? And we wanted to give them the tools to manage that. So we understand there's a lot of different roles that are played within families. And so we wanted to explore those dynamics and help people understand them to be able to manage those relationships better. And then we also have other programs like our debate program. We really have focused on debates for a couple really important purposes. First of all, we know that that conservatives tend to be drawn to a debate more than a dialogue. These are actually words that are a little bit tinged with color. And when blues have told us, hey, why don't we call this a dialogue? We say, well, actually, it's for a specific purpose that it is called a debate. And it's really engaging. It's super engaging to both sides, but it really helps us to ensure that we have a full array of voices in the conversation. And we have one-on-one conversations, which I think are also really important because it allows groups to encounter one another in a relaxed setting where they're not performing. They are, it's more effective to speak to each other one-on-one because we can truly be ourselves and not worry about who is judging us based on what we're saying to someone who might disagree with us. And we have multiple dimensions that people connect across. It's not just red blue, but it's also urban rural. It's intergenerational. It's racial and ethnic. So those are just really deep, important experiences that people at Braver Angels have. And we also have book and movie discussions and other kinds of activities that people can join in on. There's a lot. So I would definitely recommend that people explore all this stuff on our website.
I want to underline something you just said, Randy. The statement that divides are not just political divides, but they have all kinds of complexion in our country: racial, economic, rural, urban, geographic. So it's so pleasing to hear that you're addressing all of those. I want to turn to another concept, DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion, Randy. Our OLLI, like many other institutions, is pondering how to embrace DEI goals. And we understand that the focus shouldn't only apply to racial or ethnic diversity, but also diversity of viewpoint or ideology. So it occurs to me that Braver Angels design processes might be useful here, and I wonder what your comments are.
Yeah, absolutely. The diversity of viewpoint is something that many DEI programs miss. And, the fact is many people around the country are feeling alienated from their organizational cultures by the fact that the culture is really a lot more accepting of one viewpoint than another. And this happens on both the left and the right. I think with the current DEI programs that we see in a lot of corporate settings, it does tend to alienate folks on the right more often. I don't think this is a surprise to anyone listening. But, when organizational cultures devolve into that sort of division, it can really impact their effectiveness. And, we also know that the aggregate of organizational cultures rolls up into societal culture. And so we definitely are focused on the many organizations that are coming to us and telling us that they're having these internal struggles. And we know that our tools are able to help them. So we have developed a workshop called Work in Politics. We're actually still looking for workplaces to pilot this workshop. And, it focuses on things like the internal dynamics of an organization and how those can sometimes be like a family, right? There's hierarchies, there's, generational differences. There's, lots of, it's a place where you don't necessarily choose the people you're interacting with, right? So it can be just as complex as family dynamics. And so we absolutely think that this workshop is going to be vital for impacting the tone of politics in this country in general, and our discourse. So yeah, if anyone has an organization that they're interested in piloting our Work in Politics workshop, we would certainly be interested in that.
You may have just planted some ideas in Ollie leadership who are attending today. Thanks, Randy.
Great.
I want to ask the mission of bridging the partisan divide, which is Braver Angels' mission. How has that mission affected the organization, staffing, and how you conduct your operations?
Yeah, one thing that is, I think, a bit unique to our organization among the bridge building world is our emphasis on balance at every level of leadership. So I mentioned it when you asked about the funding, but we have our Braver Angels rule, which is that in everything that we do and every level of leadership within the organization, there needs to be real balance between the red and the blue representation there. And so, I think that has helped us to grow effectively, because otherwise, in the bridge building world, it's fairly common that more liberal folks are drawn to that sort of endeavor, whereas I mentioned the experiences of my conservative colleagues and friends in California. I don't think it's only in blue states that this happens. It's really a phenomenon in our wider culture, especially media and corporate culture, and so many of these conservative folks are feeling like their opinions, their perspectives are really not understood and not desired to be understood. So they, it's not surprising that we have a more difficult time getting them into our workshops than blues. So we put a lot of effort into making sure that there is balance, especially in terms of our leadership, so we can lead by example.
Very good. I've got a question for you, Randy, about politics that I think may be on the minds of a lot of people listening today. I saw a recent poll reporting that 79% of Democrats say they have little or nothing in common with Republicans, while 74% of Republicans say the same thing about the Democrats. So can you tell us about any specific initiatives Braver Angels might have to reach politicians and other thought leaders in our country? What's been the response from those politicians? Any positive results to report?
Yeah, absolutely. We have an entire program called Braver Politics that is specifically designed to engage with our elected officials and other public officials, from school boards all the way up to U.S. Congress. Actually, last year and in 2021, I had the distinct privilege of working with staffers for the U.S. Congress on trainings, and we Dr. Bill Doherty, who I mentioned is one of our co-founders who designed our programs. He's worked with Congress people, and we've had success working with legislators at every level. So the state legislatures, city councils, even down to the school board level, right? So and the reaction has been overwhelmingly positive to those programs. They're asking us to keep going. And one of the reasons for that is it actually would make their jobs easier. They currently exist in a really toxic environment. And, elected officials, their staffers, they're miserable because they are, they're being confronted by this polarization in ways that they had never before. And so they've definitely told us that if you can help us create a less toxic environment for our work, they would be extremely grateful. So we're grateful ourselves for that opportunity, for being invited. So we're really excited for the future of that program. And of course I can share the link as well for our program there. It's braverangels.org/politics if people are interested.
Well, hey, the truth of it is that the cultures of organizations are driven by leadership, right? So when are you going to be invited to come along with Bill Doherty to speak at our House of Representatives in Washington?
I really hope that that happens soon. Actually, we have been engaged with a committee that it's now dissolved, but they did actually adopt several of our recommendations. It was the Committee for the Modernization of Congress, and it was a committee that really worked in a truly bipartisan way. So you know, it had equal numbers of each party, and they really shared power effectively. And so there was lots of ancillary things that not related to polarization that they recommended, but they did focus a lot on what is creating this polarization, and we did some really cool work with them. So we do have, you know, some really good inroads to U.S. Congress, and we plan to continue that work for the foreseeable future.
Wonderful. I'm sure all of us listening wish you well in that work for the better good of all. I want to talk a little bit about what's going on college campuses, Randy. We know that college campuses often face strife due to rancorous polarization. Is Braver Angels doing anything in those arenas?
Absolutely. Yeah, we actually have a really well-developed college debates and discourse program. And it's in partnership with the American Council of Trustees and Alumni, and an organization called Bridge USA, which is a student-run organization that exists around the country. And through this program, we, you know, the initial focus has been debates. And we've engaged thousands of students, I believe about 5,000 at this point, from over 100 schools around the country in those debates. And the program is actually expanding from debates to workshops and other activities in a new curricular toolkit that's available to colleges. So we are really expanding our network of activities around the country in college campuses, and it's been incredibly effective for us. And also, it's helped to bring in a new generation of Americans to the conversation, to make sure that we are cultivating this type of leadership from the get-go. We're even doing programs in grade school. So my colleague who I mentioned, who lives here, Mary, and had that kind of transformative experience with her personal relationship, she's working, and I've actually worked with her with local high schools, and there's people around the country that are working with high school and even middle school students to really cultivate that strong depolarization leadership.
Okay, I wanted to talk with you about how you get red folks into your environments, but you touched on that already, so I'm going to save that for later if we want to, in the Q&A, get into it some more. Sure. Let me, in a similar vein though, Randy, what might you say to a skeptic who says they just can't believe that the Braver Angels approach can create understanding between two sides that might literally hate each other? And I want to emphasize that word hate. Like, let's say, a Palestinian and an Israeli, or an Irish Catholic and a Protestant. What might you say to those skeptics? Is there some optimism there?
Yeah, you know, my answer to that would be, people have been doing this work successfully around the world, right? In those places that you mentioned, they're having severe conflict for decades and decades. And they've been, you know, really effective in that work. But the problem is always scaling, right? So we know that attitudes can be changed, that people can really come to see one another more effectively, but really getting people fully invested in this activity, and getting people to realize how important that is for the health of our country as a democratic republic, is so vital, right? So the scaling is truly the important part, and you know, we are working on many different ways to scale, but that, you know, the work is absolutely effective, and we have very hard data that says that it is.
I enjoyed watching one of the podcasts that you ran, Randy, where you were speaking with a tour operator. I think it was Mejdi Tours that operates worldwide, but primarily in the Middle East. And he was talking about stories where Palestinians and Israelis, after spending some time together and getting to understand each other a little bit, could have an improved relationship. So it was very optimistic. I don't know if you want to reflect back on that podcast at all.
Yeah, absolutely. I mentioned before that storytelling is very central to what we do as an organization. And what Mejdi Tours does is when they go to a tour of a conflict zone. So, they started in Israel and Palestinian territories. They've worked in Northern Ireland. They've worked in the Baltic region. They've worked in Colombia, and they even now have a tour of Washington, D.C. And with every one of those tours, they have a dual narrative approach where they get tour guides that come from the different perspectives, and they're not fighting one another, but they're telling their stories and how their culture and their personal experience connects to the sites that they're seeing. And that is one of the most effective things that I can imagine for really understanding a conflict and working through it. So that's that was a really inspiring podcast. It's if you go to our podcasts on any of the platforms and also on YouTube, you can watch that. It's one of the most recent ones, and it was really inspiring. I hope to go on one of those tours myself soon. So we'll see.
Speaking of great podcasts, you just reminded me of another that I really enjoyed, one of my favorites that you were part of. Help me remember the title. It was something like a Protestant, a Catholic, and a Jew walk into a bridge building experience. Do you remember that one?
Yeah, I mean, our cultural backgrounds have such relevance to how we approach this work. And so I come from a Jewish background, and I'm not necessarily a religious person, but the experiences that I've had with Braver Angels have really tied in well with my Jewish identity. I have been holding Passover Seders for years. Actually, I started when I was living in Michigan, started a tradition of inviting all of my non-Jewish friends to a Seder to experience that culture. And when I started with Braver Angels, and actually, especially during the pandemic, when I knew that I couldn't invite people in person, I converted it to an online event and invited people from all different faiths. And it was an amazing experience. And one of the things that really ties in for me with my understanding of Judaism is the idea, the most salient lesson from the Passover story is that we shouldn't celebrate the suffering of our enemies. And that's clearly very resonant with what we do at Braver Angels. And that lesson, I think, is repeated over and over in the Passover story, and reinforces the Jewish idea that kind of threats to justice anywhere are threats to justice everywhere, and that we should experience suffering that other people are going through as if it is our own suffering. So, and there were absolutely beautiful connections with faith and spirituality that the other guests in that podcast were able to draw as well. And so I think in recent years, while I haven't grown to be a person of actual faith in God or the supernatural, it has reinforced my understanding of what those belief systems can offer to us, how they can help us to understand one another a little bit better. And so my attitude, my approach towards those with religious faith has definitely changed in the past few years.
Thanks for sharing that personal experience with us, Randy. I appreciated it. Let's talk a little bit about the Braver Angels debates, or a little more about them. I understand that they're quite well attended. I've seen statistics that you had quite a few of them. What is the process used by Braver Angels leadership to decide what debate topics are chosen And can you illustrate for us some of the past debate resolutions?
Yeah, the debate committee, so there's a standing committee that is evaluating proposed resolutions for these debates. And what they look for is a few different factors. They want to look for what people are excited about and really engaged in, what topics people would be willing to speak about, right? Because obviously the participation is the important part. And then, of course, is there balance? Are they going to get a balanced conversation? And they also craft the resolutions to make sure that they are worded in a way that can be appealing to both sides. And so if a resolution is, a resolution always has to have a partisan tinge to it, so people can oppose it or support it. But we try to do, equal numbers of resolutions that have a red tinge or a blue tinge, right? So there was one debate resolution that I saw. I didn't actually attend this specific debate, but I think it's illustrative because the resolution is resolved: treat other ex-presidents like Trump, and they'll all go to jail. This resolution was debated in the wake of the news about Mar-a-Lago and the documents that had been stored there. And I think it's a really interesting resolution because it kind of reveals something about the frustrations that Reds have had about this issue. And so personally, I tend to lean blue, and I tend to have pretty typical beliefs about how those documents were handled and things of that sort as other blues. But it's interesting with the latest news that of course Biden has had documents uncovered, and now even Mike Pence is getting in on the act, right? And so it kind of reinforces the idea that, well, it's pretty easy for a politician to leave office and take some of those documents and maybe mistakenly or otherwise, but that these things are this is something that I think informs the conservative perspective about this and how people see Trump being treated. And while it doesn't change my mind about about how that issue unfolded, I think that those kinds of debates are really important to help us to understand how each of us is thinking about these issues. And what I often think about is when we look at a specific issue and we see how each point is subtly spun by the media that tends to work on either side. If you kind of believe the subtle spin for each one of those things for your own side of media, you're going to come up with a very coherent narrative about that particular story. Now, it may not be a narrative that I can agree with, but once I understand kind of the influences that are pointing you in that direction and how they all hang together as a coherent perspective, I mean, that's makes for such a more effective way to relate to one another and to actually make progress in terms of understanding each other.
Randy, we've all seen debates where people attack or criticize each other, really get quite emotional. You got any tricks? Does Braver Angels have any tricks in terms of their debate process to prevent this kind of stuff?
Yeah, we definitely have a structure that is designed very carefully to make sure that the tone of that debate is positive and helps people learn from each other. So we used parliamentary procedure to ensure that when people are asking questions of one another, for example, that those questions are actually directed to the debate chair, right? The person who is running the debate. So they say something like, "Mr. Chair, the previous speaker said such and such. Do they believe that this is true," or something like that. So that's the typical phrasing that you'll hear in those debates. And while it's a fairly subtle point, a subtle tweak, it actually does a world of good for the tone of that debate. And people universally have told us that they really appreciate the format of those debates. We also give people a set amount of time to talk, and we give the folks in the audience a chance to ask them questions after each speech. And that's, pretty well controlled by the chairs. It really does create a stimulating environment where people are just really enthusiastic when they come away from it.
So everyone listening on this today, make sure you go and sign up to get emails from Braver Angels. You'll find out about all these debates, and you'll be able to watch them yourselves. I want to talk a little bit about the moderators or facilitators, Randy. The success of these programs really requires competent moderators or facilitators. And I know you've moderated many times. How are the moderators and facilitators trained and coached by Braver Angels?
Yes, so we recognized that we really needed a system that could scale and could train a lot of folks to be able to run these workshops in communities throughout the country, right? So we created an online system where it gives moderator trainees the chance to watch videos of actual workshops in action, and then to kind of do activities to reinforce the principles that are playing out in those demonstrations. And that's followed up with live training that includes Dr. Bill Doherty. And so you get real feedback from him and other really experienced moderators. And what's so important is that people come to internalize the principles of Braver Angels, because it does take a while. It takes some work to really understand those principles deeply and understand how they function in practice, right? So there's a lot of emphasis on that, and I think that our moderator training program is incredibly effective and just a lot of fun to be a part of. And we also have ongoing support for our moderators. So we have regular moderator calls, monthly moderator calls, where the moderator community can get together and discuss the challenges that they're seeing in workshops and new situations and also how to moderate the new workshops that we're developing.
I also want to point out that your lead moderator trainer, you know this, happens to be a lady by the name of Maggie Bayless, who is an Ann Arbor resident. And I think Maggie may be listening in today. So a shout out to you, Maggie, and the wonderful work that you're doing.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, Randy, I had a big societal question for you. As you all know, there's a great concern in our country that there is risk that our democratic experiment may be failing. How might you see Braver Angels as one of the many defenses against this possible outcome?
Yeah, I want to reemphasize that the free exchange of ideas is really vital to the health of a democracy. And, I have a colleague that likes to talk about, I don't know exactly where he's gotten this figure, but he says the average democracy lasts for 250 years, and we're about 247 years old or something like that. And so it's getting a little bit worrisome, right? It feels like we are losing that free exchange of ideas. Interestingly enough, people are sorting themselves geographically. We're a very mobile society, and that has great benefits, but it can also have really tough impacts. And when people are sorting themselves such that they really only encounter those who agree with them on a day-to-day basis, then we lose the ability to challenge one another and to improve our ideas in this way. And so we think that Braver Angels and our other allies in the depolarization world can really help to restore this free exchange and to strengthen the character of our democracy.
Okay, good answer. Thanks. There are currently quite a few what I'll call flashpoints in our country, Randy. Things like women's rights to choose, education in our schools, immigration, gun control. I mean, there's a litany of these things. Does Braver Angels ever take any positions on these issues, and why or why not?
Yeah, we don't. We definitely want to make sure that all of these issues are able to be addressed within the context and framework of our programs, because, like I said, we need a constant conversation about all of these issues. But for us, the most important thing is just the ability to talk to one another. And if we were to take positions as an organization, we would likely lose the ability to even approach some people of certain groups, and we want those people to be in the conversation. So it doesn't really make sense for us to adopt positions on policies. We want a variety of perspectives on those policies to be represented, and that's what we do.
Makes sense. So any good organization who's doing amazing work like Braver Angels has got to think about how do they grow and scale. So what are the kinds of things that Braver Angels is doing to grow and scale, reach broader audiences?
Yeah, I mentioned our Braver Politics initiative, and we have lots of initiatives that we're working on constantly to be able to reach out to a broader set of Americans. One of the things, so the thing that I am focused on most right now is a program called Braver Partners. And, we have recognized that the scale of polarization in this country is such that as just a single organization, we're not really equipped to make such a huge dent, even if we get, pretty large. So we really need to foster a movement. And so what we're doing is trying to bring in organizations from every sector of society. So it could be other nonprofits. It could also be educational or religious institutions. It could be even companies. Every kind of organization that exists in society, as I said, it rolls up to the culture of those organizations rolls up to the larger societal culture. And so we are building a network of partners that is supportive of this mission of bringing Americans together to have that free exchange. And we are focusing on the target of our convention, which is coming up in July of this year. It's going to be in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. And we're really focused on bringing that network together and representatives of that network, liaisons from all of our partners coming together to kind of, foster collaborations, come to know each other and see how each can contribute to the field of depolarization. Each organization has something unique to contribute. So we definitely are excited about bringing them all together. And if we are able to build that movement where organizations large and small of every type are engaged in this work, then their members are really going to be engaged in that work as well. And that, I think, is how it becomes really powerful to build, to scale our mission.
And on the subject of spreading the word, let's talk about broadcast media, social media. We know how these resources or sources can spread hate and division in our country. Is Braver Angels using these same information sources or techniques to fight back to spread the good message?
We are, yeah, absolutely. And it just so happens that we have a new social media manager who started at the beginning of this year. Her name is Gabby Timmis, and she's from Michigan as well. And she has been really developing our social media capabilities quite effectively. She started out as an internal reporter, reporting on the different activities that were happening within our organization. I know she covered an event that happened in Michigan, and that was just really impactful for her. And so we're so grateful to have her and several other members of our social media team doing that work and putting out positive messages, examples of people working across that divide, because working together in a common goal is really the magic of what we do, right? And so showing those examples is so powerful. And we also have a social media workshop. So we have an e-learning course that people can take right now, and help with their skills at engaging on social media. And we're also in the process of rolling out a live workshop on social media. So yeah, look for that. And I think that's going to make a real impact. If anyone's seen the Netflix movie, The Social Dilemma, you know what a big impact that social media is having on the discourse in this country. And so we knew that it was definitely a field that we had to look into and try to make our own impact on.
Very good. Let's see, kind of a closure type as we approach closure question. Randy, if OLLI members are as intrigued by Braver Angels as I am, and I expect they might be, how might they join Braver Angels? You mentioned the cost to join is a lowly $12. Can they experience Braver Angels events without joining, just to check things out? How do people get involved with Braver Angels?
Absolutely, yeah. So, people can subscribe to our weekly newsletters if they're not ready to jump right in and join as a member. I've actually just written our upcoming newsletter. It was on the theme of the universe's power of combination. I was inspired by our breakthroughs in nuclear fusion. And so it was kind of a meditation on that power of combination. So yeah, if people would like to subscribe, please go to our website and sign up for the newsletter. I also wanted to share the link to join us. And so that's in the chat now. And it's just $12 a year, so it's a pretty low bar. But actually, our events are free for everyone. We really want to make everything accessible for anyone who wants to take part. So so people can definitely join those events even if they're not a member. And also I guess it would be good to share the link. Let's see, there's an upcoming in-person workshop that's going to be happening, let's see, in Southeast Michigan. I don't remember exactly where it is, but I'm going to share the link to sign up for that event, and you can check that out.
Thanks, Randy. So a final sort of a question for you, Randy. Considering what we're up against in this country, rage, contempt, terrifying political violence, toxic conflict, choking airwaves, even poisoning of our own holiday meals. Do you find hope, Randy? Are you optimistic that Braver Angels can have some kind of an impact?
Yeah, I am really optimistic based on the experiences that I've had, the stories that I mentioned about people's, transformations in people's personal relationships, the inspiration that I see when I run a workshop and someone, someone internalizes a principle and gets really excited about the prospect of using that and how much it can change the nature of the interactions that they have, is just really inspiring to me. So, I'll admit I do have some regular delusions of grandeur that that I and other leaders of Braver Angels can really have a transformative effect on this country. Last year I was at a performance of Hamilton, and I was just really inspired, and I started to think about how it connected with my work, and I think that in some ways, the work that we're doing to sustain this democracy, to make sure that it survives, is just as important as the work that the founders did to lay the foundation for that democracy. So, I guess maybe it's not totally realistic to think of myself in the same way as Hamilton, but maybe this Zoom call is the room where it happens. That's kind of what I like to imagine.
Wonderful closing statement, Randy. We have ended our prepared questions. We're going to show you, or actually Randy's going to show you a wonderful video of about Braver Angels. It lasts only about 4 minutes. I want to invite all of you to start feeding your questions into the Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen. So while you're thinking about them, Randy, why don't you unroll that video for us?
Absolutely. All right, let's see. Let me get this started.
Politics has always been a passionate subject, and we've always had deep political disagreements. That's the way it's supposed to be. But we've gotten to the point where people can't even talk to one another. Americans no longer see their political opponents as simply wrong or misguided. They see them as bad people whose ways of thinking are dangerous and incomprehensible. They see them as enemies. This level of rancor and mistrust threatens our democracy, and it makes it harder for us to move forward as a nation, regardless of who the president is.
The fact that we live in what feels like, some people call it a cold civil war, that takes a toll on all of us.
We've been excommunicated from a lot of our friends in the last couple of years, and it makes me sad.
This is one organization that's doing a lot to kind of overcome that and get people back to where we were, which is neighbors, friends, communities.
Better Angels was born in response to the crisis of polarization. We are truly bipartisan. From our staff to our funding to our board of directors, we're evenly split, half conservative, half liberal. Everything we do comes from the bottom up. We're an almost entirely volunteer-led operation. We wanted to see, could we get together a group of folks who'd voted for Trump and a group of folks who'd voted for Clinton and get them in a room together to see how can we bring people together to not get them to agree or to come to the middle, but to maybe change how they think about one another.
You know, it's funny, I think a lot of people would look at 2020 and argue that this is the least hospitable time for the work that we're doing, because we know that our politics has a tendency to bring out the worst in us. But it also is an extraordinary opportunity, because this deeper project of civic renewal, of healing the relationships that exist between the American people across the cultural and political divides, the importance of this project is going to become clearer and clearer to people over the course of this election.
A lot of people are going to have to let off steam. I really believe that it's better to do it in a productive way, where they see each other as fellow human beings. It inspires me every Better Angels debate I take part in.
When you're there in person and you have to face the person you're talking to, we remember suddenly the rules of civil discourse and kind of how we should act in society. It's something that really distinguishes this form of conversation and debate.
It's all well and good to talk about civility and being nice to people, but the missing ingredient is courage.
In 2020, we also need courage. The courage that it takes to have a difficult conversation, to put yourself out there.
What we've been saying is that this year, it's not enough to call in our Better Angels. We have to call in our Braver Angels.
The name Braver Angels captures the evolving spirit of Better Angels. We have to be willing to summon the courage to see the best in the other side, see the best in our fellow Americans.
Courage means becoming a leader in your own community who's standing up for America, not just for your political party or your tribe or folks with whom you share an identity, but standing up for something larger that we can all believe in. If we can create a large enough movement that is clamoring for a more courageous style of politics, we can change the incentives.
That's something that can only be achieved through what we call patriotic empathy, this idea that your love for your country is demonstrated in your love for your fellow American. As Braver Angels, we're able to lean into that with courage and boldness.
It will make you feel like we can serve this place, and our country can serve humanity in a way that is actually beautiful and actually does us justice.
This is not a left-wing movement, this is not a right-wing movement, but it is indeed an American movement. We still have it in us to be champions for what is right and what is graceful and what is decent here in the United States.
In this time of public health crisis, Braver Angels is taking its work online, hosting weekly online debates, virtual book discussions, concerts, skills training courses, and soon, one-on-one red-blue conversations. As Americans stay home to protect their fellow citizens, Braver Angels is bringing us together in new ways and helping us find the courage needed to transcend our partisan differences and overcome this challenge. Go to braverangels.org, sign up to join our email list, and at the end of the day, try to treat each other with respect, empathy, and find the courage needed to talk to people, even if, and perhaps especially when, you don't agree with them.
Okay, beautiful. Thank you, Randy. Remember that, everyone, braverangels.org. I'm looking through the questions, and I think I have to apologize. Apparently, there must have been a technical glitch. Someone indicated that they just got in at 1:19. What have they missed? I apologize if there was a problem there. The good news is this whole thing has been recorded, and within 10 days to 2 weeks, it will be available through the Ali office. So you can find out what you missed, and those of you who want to look at it again, it'll be available for you. One question here, Randy, they're talking about the red-blue workshops. Does the same group work together throughout the workshop or the duration of that program?
Yeah, so we are working with the same. We work with groups of roughly 5 to 8 people on each side, and we want to have parity between the size of the two groups. So it is the same group that's working through all of those exercises, and that's really important because, as I mentioned, the structure is really set up to build that trust over the course of the day. Right. So it's important that each person get to witness that trust building and be part of it. And I see that the question also asks about the duration of the Red Blue workshop. We tend to schedule the full day workshops for 7 hours with a 1-hour lunch break in the middle. So 3 hours on either side of that. And then we do the shorter versions, which is just the first 2 exercises for about a 3-hour session.
Okay, thank you. Hey, here's a good question that I think we might all have asked. One of the issues I confront is the aggressiveness of the red viewpoint, name calling, belittling, etc. How do I address this in a conversation with someone like that?
Well, I guess I can see the perspective of this person, that they're from their perspective, the issue is on one side. I can tell you that I have experienced similar things to that person. I've also experienced where it's going the other way, and that is, it's challenging for anyone involved with that. So when there is name calling and belittling, denigrating the beliefs of the person on the other side, I mean, there's a lot of skills that you can use to try to shift the tone of that conversation. One of the most effective things, I think, is to appeal to that person's sense of self. And so when you ask them, well, are you open to learning from perspectives on the other side? Are you willing to listen to things that may disagree with what you believe already? And most people are going to, view themselves as open and curious people. So if you ask them that, they'll say, yeah, I'm open to doing that. And it takes hard work to continue to check in, and make sure that intention remains between yourself and the person that you're talking to. But if you are checking in and you are kind of reinforcing that instinct towards curiosity, then I find it to be pretty effective. But it does take a lot of practice. And so we definitely encourage you to come to our workshops, especially that Skills for Bridging the Divide workshop, that can help to build those habits of how we foster that effective conversation.
Yeah, tough question, but good, thoughtful answer. Thank you. Let's both, Randy, put in a pitch for a book that one of your colleagues wrote, Monica Guzman. The title of the book is I Never Thought of It That Way. I Never Thought of It That Way. And she delves into the nature of conversation and the difficulty of connecting with people who are different. And I recommend that to all of you. It's really a great resource. I never thought of it that way. Okay, here's another question for you. Are there organizations like Braver Angels in other countries, Randy?
Yeah, there definitely are. And in fact, we are expanding to have a presence in other countries as well. So there is now a nascent alliance, a budding alliance in Europe. And so we're really excited about, about that expansion. And, we still, of course, want to focus on our core, which is the challenges to our American system of government, but we know that these patterns are not unique to us, right? They are happening all around the world, and so there's definitely a need for this type of organization. And yeah, there are organizations like ours that are rising to fill that need in the rest of the world.
Thank you. Oh, here's one. Randy, what do you think of the term woke, W-O-K-E?
Yeah, I mean, it is clearly a word that has taken on a lot of baggage, you might say, and cultural significance. It's one of those buzzwords that we are very mindful that language is so powerful, and the different ways that we use words based on our backgrounds and who we surround ourselves with and the media that we're exposed to is a real issue. So woke is one of those words that as soon as you say it, the way that you've used it is indicative of what you believe, and it's gonna project your beliefs to those around you. And I mean, right now it does seem like the word is being used exclusively on the Republican side, on the conservative side of the aisle. I remember having a conversation about the word several years ago with one of my good friends who is a progressive, who basically was telling me that it's not appropriate to apply that word to yourself, especially as a white person. It's a word that was developed from communities within predominantly African American communities, and has a very specific connotation. And so we should be very careful about how we use that word. Now, obviously, it has been, the context of that word has changed a lot, right? But there are so many words for which the same thing has happened. And so I think that it's just really important that we are cognizant and vigilant about the words, the language that we're using with one another, and the understanding that that various people have of that language, so we can make sure that we're not misunderstood. And if we are, let's try to explain ourselves a little bit more thoroughly and not try to lean on buzzwords to do that work for us.
Got a question here for you, Randy, about news media that we know likes to stir up depolarization because it's profit-making for them. What can be done to entice news media to see the light and start to focus on depolarization?
Yeah, one of the reasons that the media has been a contributor to the issue of polarization is because it does serve their bottom line. They are, following rational cues about what people want to engage with. And, especially on social media, we know that anger and outrage are the most effective ways to achieve virality, right? And so, we can blame the media, but we also know that there are structural incentives that are built in that create these kinds of behaviors. And so one of the ways that I think we can positively affect the media environment is by encouraging the creation of platforms that foster better communication, that have better incentives built in. So I mentioned that movie, The Social Dilemma, and it talks a lot about the incentives that are baked into those platforms that encourage that outrage. We're working with new platforms that have different incentive structures, and there's lots of ways that positive interaction can be incentivized. And so I definitely encourage people to look into that, to look at our social media workshop and see how they can have a positive influence in social media. We're also working with members of the traditional media to get them to our workshops to really give them the opportunity to see how impactful those experiences can be. And, I think we can make the case that they can achieve just as much, audience penetration with, covering the positives and covering the breakthroughs that people are having in their relationships as they can with that outrage and that division. So being consistent about that message, I think, is going to be really important.
Here's the question that comes up in conversations between two different sides all the time. The question, Randy, is how do you deal with different understanding of facts? Facts in quote.
Yes. I mean, this is such a common issue because especially in the current media environment, we know that each of us is swimming in a different sea of information and facts. And so, one example that I think is an important illustrator of how, we can have different facts that we lean on that might point to different policy ideas or prescriptions, may not be mutually exclusive, right? So if you look at statistics for crime over the past 40 years, we've seen a major reduction in crime, and that idea, that fact, may point to a very specific policy prescription for someone on one side of a debate, perhaps about guns or perhaps about education or community development, things like that. And then if we look at the past few years, especially in cities, and especially in a few major cities, we can see that there's been an uptick in crime. And so that may point in a different direction. And so basically, if you zoom in or zoom out on a data set, you can come up with a different fact, right, about which direction that crime has been going in. So I think that it's when you hear a fact that disagrees with your own experience, rather than saying, well, obviously that's not true and you're completely misguided, what you should, I think, do is lean into curiosity and ask, well, where did you get that fact? And what tends to influence the way that you think about the issue that we're talking about? Because you may find that they have exposure to a source that you don't. And that is going to have a very big impact on, and that source may be something that you don't consider legitimate, but it also may be something that might surprise you. And so I would say lean into that curiosity and try to get a better understanding of the story behind that fact.
Very good. Thanks, Randy. Here's another one for you. Let's say, here's a hypothetical that may not be so hypothetical. Let's say you find yourself in a fight or flight conversation that really challenges your morals or values. What tool in your conversation toolbox do you lean on to help steer your reaction and therefore the conversation in a more productive direction?
Yeah, this is a great question. And it's something that really, I think, brought me into the field of depolarization in the first place, because my focus was on curiosity. I feel like I tend to be a curious person. I tend to really be interested in other people's stories and how their experiences have impacted their beliefs. And so when I find myself really kind of triggered by something that someone believes or that they're insisting that I should understand, I really try to lean into that curiosity once again and probe, how they have gotten to that point about believing something that I may feel is so reprehensible. And it's this challenge, I think, is unique for each person. So I'm not going to say that we all have the same capacity to put ourselves in that position to sustain a conversation that may feel really threatening, especially if that person seems to be denigrating people that we really care about or ourselves. But I do think that it is possible to build that capacity over time, and to practice leaning into that curiosity, to practice focusing on the idea that, we can't really control the beliefs that we have. We can't willfully change a belief. And so when someone has a belief that's different from our own, let's not try to impose ours and change theirs. Let's try to really understand how they get to theirs.
Next one I've got here, Randy, is more of a statement of fact than a question, but perhaps you've got a reaction to it. It says, speaks to how different opinions or sides have been weaponized by politicians and businesses and media sources and advertisers for their economic or political benefit, not necessarily for well-intentioned ideological reasons. Any response for that reality?
Yeah, I mean, I tend to believe that human beings are, at our nature, fairly good. We want to do the right thing. We feel good when we help other people feel good. But the fact is that there's a lot of incentives in this world to make us behave otherwise. And, the world is so complex that it's impossible to always be making the right decision. And so I think when we look at other people's decisions and we see them acting in a way that just seems morally reprehensible or just inconsistent with their own values, hypocritical, that we consider all of the incentives that have built up in our society to create the conditions for people to behave this way. And so I guess I try to give people the benefit of the doubt and believe that there must be some reason that they are acting in this way, that they are weaponizing things that seem unfair to me. And I know that I am not immune from that kind of behavior. And so I try to think, all right, well, if I were put in that position by, a lot of negative factors or the need to put food on my table and support my family and just survive in this world, in this really complex world, is there an explanation that is a bit more understandable than what I had in my head when I first came into the conversation?
Okay, I've got one last question for you, Randy. And the question relates to polarizing issues like abortion, gun control, and affirmative action. In your experience, what are the most extremely polarizing topics?
Oh, yeah. I mean, certainly we've seen abortion be a tight focus of political conversation recently. We've seen guns be a very tight focus, and of course, in the summer of 2020, we know that race came to the fore, as a super important conversation that people really felt needed to happen and was overdue. And there's also a lot of types of conversations that have politicized and divided places that are really not used to that, like especially like school boards, right? So race and gender and sexuality have definitely been pivotal issues that are dividing people on a local level, especially at this point. So we have definitely tried to create platforms to have discussions about those issues through our debates, through our common ground workshops, and I think we're doing a really effective job. There's one series of common ground workshops in particular that we're emphasizing right now, which is our election systems and the trustworthiness of them. Obviously, folks on either side have very strong feelings about our electoral system and the way that the other side is interacting with it and trying to affect it. And this is one of the issues where we feel that if we can bring the most extreme viewpoints together for this issue and actually make progress with those groups, that we can do anything. We can talk about anything. So I've actually gotten a chance to run one of these common ground workshops on election integrity and trustworthiness, and it was a great experience. And we had a lot of shared ideas, and I think that it's an illustration of what we can do with a really well-designed program.
Very good. Well, everyone, we have come to the end of our time together. I'm just hoping that all of you on this webinar have been sufficiently intrigued and enthused by Braver Angels and their mission and the amazing things they've been doing, and that you will connect with them through the website, become supporters if you choose to. There's a lot there for you. And Randy Liaz, I can't thank you enough on behalf of Osher Lifelong Learning Institute at the University of Michigan. You have brought us expertise, thoughtful answers, and if Randy Liaz ever runs for office, I'm voting for him. So thank you very much. It's been a pleasure, Randy. Thank you so much. So,
it's been a pleasure for me. Thanks so much for having me.
So with that, we're saying goodbye to all of you. Thank you very much for your attention.